Good evening. How's everybody doing? Doing good. All right. I want you to talk to me today. Is that all right? We came to tell some stories. Is that okay? Oh, Lord, y'all a dry crowd on a Friday afternoon. Somebody better tell y'all I'm a Baptist preacher. I'll keep you all night long. Then take up an offering and give it to the deacon in the back, okay? All right. I'm Terrance Vickerstaff. This is home. This is home. This has been home since 1835. 1835. When an uncle named Mose was thrown on the back of a horse and rode with Judge John Jackson Harper over to what is called at that time the New Wilderness. The New Wilderness of Macon County, Alabama. And over 100 years later, we're still here. My presentation, my part to import onto you on this evening is when the roll is called, creating and using obituary databases in cemetery preservation. On Sunday mornings here in Auburn, Alabama, regardless of the church, there were some hymns that were sung. And this is one song that was sung, and I remember it in my growing up, whether I was at Lee's Chapel, whether I was at Ebenezer, Mount Moriah, Green Chapel, didn't matter. And it says, when the roll is called up yonder, 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 I'll be there. When the roll is called, in class we call it what? Well, we used to call rolls. Leela, here. Terrance, present. Patricia, absent. Why is it important to call the roll? To make sure you're there. To make sure you're there. And that's a part of cemetery preservation. Among these cedars at Baptist Hill, there's a roll. And that roll is, you can find it on Find a Graves. You can find it on Billion Graves. But they're more than just a name. Is that right? More than just a name. More than just a name. So when the roll is called up yonder, the question is, will my name be called and will my story be remembered? And that is all that the people that are buried in the sacred ground of Baptist Hill and in any other cemetery that they're asking. When we walk through the cemetery and we look at names and dates, for some memories pop up. For others, we don't know the particulars about their story. But the question is, do we have enough information? Does enough information remain to find out who these folks are? When the roll is called up yonder, will you preserve the sacred space, not only of where I'm buried, but the sacred space that my story dwells in? The sacred space that my story dwells in. And that sacred space is mind, heart, and paper. Mind, heart, and paper. Why obituaries? Why obituaries? They're some of our best sources of secondary information. Secondary. And the reason why I say it's not a primary source, it depends on who wrote it. Depends on who wrote it and how correct the information is. An obituary is a story. How many of you have ever read an obituary? All right. In this day and age, I don't take anything for granted. I'm serious. I don't take anything for granted. An obituary tells a story. It tells a story about, is it a living person or a deceased person? It's a deceased person. But sometimes the deceased while they were alive did what? They wrote their own obituary because they wanted to make sure that the story was right. They wanted to make sure that mama and daddy's name was not mom and daddy, but they wrote it down what their real name was. They wanted to make sure that not only was the story, my story told, but a little bit about my background, a little bit about the family I'm a part of, and it'll connect you to a community. It'll connect you to a community because throughout that obituary, you will see community. Using obituary databases to tell our story. I say our story because it's a connected story. Each person in here in this day and age is less than 7 degrees of separation. Less than 7. Whether it be by blood relation, whether it be by community relation. And so we're here to tell a collective story. As genealogists and family historians, we seek the basic facts about our ancestors, but we want to dive a little deeper. Is that right? We want to dive a little deeper. And as we dive a little deeper, we want to know more than the when, the where they were born, married, died. We want to make sure that we are able to determine the particulars of their story as we walk through the sacred space and remember who they are. Not only do, when we use an obituary database, when we put it together, when we begin to use it, we go to census, we go to land, we go to probate, but it's in an obituary that tells us things that some of those other primary resources don't. Obituaries give us depth to a person. It gives us depth to a person's life, and it gives us depth to other facts that gives us contextual information about the day and time that they lived. And a database is nothing but a collection, a large collection of information that you have searched, you have documented, you have searched thoroughly and found facts, some oral, some written, but you've searched and you've compiled it in one place that you're able to go to readily or send someone else to readily. There are some online databases that already exist, but they don't have the what? The depth that you're looking for. And so when we're about to put a database together, we're looking to tell the story. We may understand the larger story of Baptist Hill being connected to a Baptist church on Thatch Street, but it has a larger story. It wasn't just connected to the Baptist church on Thatch Street, but it was connected to the entire community. And so it was not just a burying ground for the Ebenezer Church, it was a burying ground for the community. So we have to understand that to be able to tell the story. There are many types of cemeteries, and we're not just, as a part of this making of this database, it may be that you're doing it for Baptist Hill. It may be that you're doing it for another cemetery that you're doing genealogical work for, but we can use all of the same tools. What type of cemetery is it? Is it a church cemetery? Is it a public or municipal cemetery? Is it a privately owned cemetery owned by an association or a private company? Or is it a family cemetery? What type of cemetery is it? What type of access do I have? What type of access do I have? And what type of access to the records do I have? What is the history of the cemetery and the other community connections? Baptist Hill is a public cemetery. At the time that it was in use, only a few burials are done now, but it was the only African American cemetery inside of the city limits. And so what are the connections? It connected community, it connected family, it connected fraternal relations. Where are the people buried and why? As you walk through your sacred space, you have to notice a couple of things. What are some things that you notice when you walk through your sacred space of your cemetery? Families are buried together. What are some of the other things that you notice when you walk through your sacred space? You notice last names. You notice on some headstones, it may say mother. It may say father, it may say grandmother, it may say daughter, it may say angel. On some, it may have occupation. It may have a fraternal symbol on the headstone. Those are some of the things that you notice as you walk through your sacred space. And those are the things that have to go inside of your database as you begin to tell the story of a person that's listed. Why a database? It's to organize our info. We can have information all over the place on lots of people, but if it's not organized into a nice, neat, composite, accessible stash where somebody can easily access it, it's no good to anyone. Obituaries as primary and secondary sources of information. If you're going to use an obituary as a primary source, you need to know that the person that wrote it knew what they were talking about. Correct? That's what a primary source is. If Regina goes and she sees the train come by, I only heard the whistle. So I can assume that it may have been a sound effect. I can assume that it may have been someone playing something on their speaker system. But Regina comes back and she says that I did actually see the train go by. That's a primary source. Secondary source is I'm not sure who wrote it, but I think the person that wrote it may have known what they're talking about, but I need to check. I need to check. And so the primary source for many of our obituaries becomes a death certificate. And I ask you to be very careful when you're pulling information found online, because I don't know who pulled the source. I don't know if it's accurate. And so you have to do your due diligence. Is that correct? As researchers, we research once, twice, thrice, and we keep researching to make sure that we have a good source. Some obituaries are found at legacy.com, al.com. You can also go to your local archives, but you've got to search, because for the people we're looking for at Baptist Hill, it's only probably about 1% that will be in an online database. You're going to have to search for these folks. And in the search for these folks, it means connecting them to someone or connecting them to some community. Some of our online databases that I've used and some others have used, Find a Grave, Bullion Graves, Ancestry.com. I'm probably sure that the university has a subscription, or al.com for some of your more recent deaths. Why are you creating a database? Why? We're creating a database for Baptist Hill. Why? Talk to me. That's okay. It's not rhetorical. This is real work. Legacy, history. Why? I need to know that 100 years from now, that the work that we've done, the families that have lived here, continue to live on. Continue to live on. My grandmother told me this. She said, I tell you about all of these people. All of them are dead and gone. But as long as you remember them, they do what? They live on. They live on. And so what information is needed for the folks in our databases that are just names and numbers to live on? So we've got to help the cemetery tell the story. The cemetery is a primary source. It's a place that we can go, but we've got to help the cemetery tell our story, to put the information in the database. And so the question is, what records may exist for Baptist Hill? What are some records that may exist? Talk to me. We're helping each other out in this room today. Talk to me. Church records, okay? Maybe census records, deed, land records, okay? So when we pull this information, are we pulling it, and do we know who we're looking for? So we got to have some names of some folks over there. Is that right? Got to have some names. The question is, okay, what records may exist? So do any cemetery or sexton records? A sexton is a person that will be the caretaker of the cemetery. But because Baptist Hill was a public cemetery, families and the community cared for it for a long time. Cemetery deeds, plat records of who's buried where. Where are the first burials? Who are the first burials that are documented in the cemetery? And when we go, are we looking for a paper trail, or when we go over to the cemetery, are we looking for headstones? Both. Because Ma may have been buried in 1900, but she may not have a headstone, but she may have an obituary. So we're looking for both. Is the cemetery surveyed? Who's buried where, with who, maybe why? Is it surveyed? We have some good maps of Baptist Hill that exist today. And we were talking at lunch, and they may need to be, updated just a little bit to reflect some of the most recent interments. But we have some good maps. And those are the things critical for us to continue to do our research. Is it mapped? Is it indexed? Who has the records? Who has the records of Baptist Hill? We got this man right here, got a few of them, and they're sitting in the bottom drawer of a lot of our homes. I'm just being real and honest. Because Grandmama kept what? Every obituary that was ever printed in Lee County, Macon, Russell, Chambers, Montgomery counties, Alabama. Yeah. And so it means I've got to search. Who still remembers? Are there people around that still remember the people that are buried there? Ask them why they remember. How are they connected to those folks? Are they related to those folks? What do they have at home? Can I come by and do what? see you. Can I come by and search through your attic? Yeah, I have been up in a lot of folks' attics. I sure have. Basements and everything else. Because what? They have information that the next generation needs. And they thought nobody wanted it. Yeah, most people think nobody wants it. Who is connected and who may have obituaries? The cemetery information, the names, the plot map. Do you have photos of the inscriptions? Because it may be that you don't, in my case, I don't live here. And so I've got to gather as much information as possible. I thank the Lord for findagrave.com and the people that do the legwork of going out and photographing, mapping, and doing the transcriptions of graves, because I've been able to find some folks that were buried all over the country. But because I'm me, I still want to go. Because I want to do what? I want to see it for myself. I want to see it for myself. And so when I find the grave, when I find the person, I'm looking for an obituary now, because there's a story behind this person. Okay, I found the person, I'm looking for the person, and the question is, I know a little bit of information. I have their name. I may understand the family context because of who's buried where, but it means now I've got to get some other folks involved. All right, case study. Mrs. Josephine Pearson Bryant is buried in the center of Baptist Hill. There is a crumbling brick wall that surrounds a family plot. But how many Bryants do you see listed? 3. You see 3. But because of connection, I know there are at least 4 that are buried in that particular plot, plus 2 Pearsons. Yeah. Mom Maud and Papa Nick and Uncle Alice and Aunt Josephine, Caddy, the baby boy. Yeah, Woodson. His name was Woodson. Yeah, Woodson. And so I have gaps. Where are the gaps here? I have name, I have lot number, I have name. I don't have surname here, her maiden name. I have beginning date, I have ending date, but I don't have specifics. Our loving, and there's a question mark. So I have gaps, is that right? So it's mine to find as much information so I can fill in the gaps. All right, here she is right here. Ms. Josephine Pearson, her funeral Sunday, May the 1st, 1960, 2:30 p.m., where? At the Ebenezer Baptist Church. That tells me her community. Not only do I find an obituary, but I find a photo. When I can put a face with a name, the story becomes that more real. So it says Mrs. Josephine Bryant, the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Nick Pearson, was born May 19th, 1911. So I can fill in a what? I can fill in the gap, because before it just had what? 1911. All right. At an early age, she joined the Ebenezer Baptist Church, where she served faithfully. It tells me of her, the context of her weekly schedule. Not only was it work, but she served in Sunday school and missionary society and the choir. And then the next thing it tells me about her marital life. So in 1929, she married the late Mr. Arliss Bryant. Into this union, 7 children were born. All right, so it tells me a little bit about her family. So now the story is getting what? It's getting broader, because I'm understanding who this lady is. She's not just a name that's surrounded by a crumbling brick wall. She's becoming a what? A real person. I knew she was a real person, but I want you to see she's a real person. So not only did I get to see some of her life, I get to see when the roll was called. When the roll is called, now I'm calling her parents. At this time, her parents were still alive. 5 daughters, 1 brother, 2 grandchildren, 1 aunt, 5 nieces, 2 nephews, and a host of other relatives and friends. It tells me about her family on this day. And so now, not only can I make some connections, but I just may want to begin to look for these people that may be in my larger database. All right. community. Pallbearers, honorary pallbearers, flower bearers, it gives you a sense of who her community was. But it also tells me this, that I know it as Baptist Hill. At that time, when they was printed, they just called it what? The Auburn Cemetery. So I've got to be careful in what I'm looking for now, because if I'm always looking for Baptist Hill, it means I might miss something with Auburn Cemetery. All right. Uncle Britton and Aunt Alice. All right. And so there's a huge, in the database, there's a huge listing of what? Drakes. So the question is, what is the connection? Where are my what gaps? What information can I find? What information is listed? And even on these, I've got some special stuff. I have some special fraternal order stuff that's listed on their headstones. So we're looking for Mr. Britton and Miss Alice. There they are right there. Nice, upright headstone. Nice, clean area divided by bricks. But they're more than that. Is that right? Yeah, they're more than that. Here's Mr. Britton right here. That's him. Yeah, that's him. And so what does, help me, tell me about him. Where's his community? Okay, all right. When did he die? 19 what? Okay, we're talking about his life. We're talking about his life. Particular things that you want to make note of. You want to make note of here is listed, whereas in my Aunt Josephine's, it listed her parents as Mr. and Mrs. Nick Pearson. So it didn't have her name, her mother's name there. So that's a what? That's a gap. All right. But here for Mr. Britton, it lists his as Britton Drake, the youngest of 12 children born to the union of the late Britton and Cynthia Drake, was born in Lee County, Alabama in October 1875. So in that first sentence, I have, he was the youngest of 12. He was born to Britton and Cynthia, and he was born in October 1875. I'm filling in the gaps to do what? Tell the story, to tell the story. And so as we continue to read about him, it tells of his what? His life. But particularly, I like to highlight his fraternal associations. He was a member of the fraternal Prince Hall affiliate, Milton W. House, Lodge number 408, and he was a member of the Brothers and Sisters, the Sisters and the Brothers of Love Society, which was a benevolent society. At that time, Alpha Insurance, you couldn't go to them for burial insurance and say, okay, he died, I need my money. All right, so it was a way of making sure that people did what? Were buried, went to school, widows and orphans, the typical things that benevolent societies do. And I was looking for my aunt's, my uncle's pens, but I couldn't find them. Couldn't find them. He passed what day? Christmas Day. So what does that say about his story? The story of that family on a Christmas Day. Would you tend to say that maybe Christmas might have been hard for a while? Because we're talking about a life that lived, a life that loved, a life that was lost. His was lost on Christmas Day. And they even give you a time at 7:40 p.m. Christmas Day had come and gone. Christmas Day we had eaten. We had done everything we needed to do, and the sun had gone down. But the sun had gone down on Deacon Britton Drake as well. And so he leaves behind his wife, Mrs. Alice D. That's important. Middle initials are important. D. Drake, 2 daughters, Miss Cynthia Alexander and Mrs. Velma Bedell. 1 sister, Miss Penny E. Dwyer. We go from 12 to how many remaining? Just 1. Just his sister. 1 sister. So they're able to tell us a lot. Simple program, but it also gives us a point of reference of community. Who was the preacher at the time? Reverend Alexander. For those that are members of the Ebenezer community and of some of the black church community in the area, they would know of that time period when Reverend Alexander was here. All right. Here we have again. His interment was what? The Auburn Cemetery. So make sure that when you're looking for everything. All right. A family whose last name you don't hear of a lot. The Rudds. Mr. Glenn and Miss Rhoda Rudd. All right. So we're gonna highlight Miss Rhoda Rudd. Is that all right? All right. So we have in the database, this is why it's important to find as many sources as you can. May the 8th, 1890. Then it says she died November the 27th, 1866. All right. So we're going to check some stuff. Is that okay? Is that all right? Here she is. Here they are. They sit right on the road. When they came through and did the widening, those were some of the graves that were in danger because of where they sit on the road. But her D stands for Miss Rhoda Dowdell Rudd. Miss Rhoda Dowdell Rudd. All right. Her community is the Lee's Chapel AME Church. All right. And her community was on Temple Avenue. Temple, right off of the Opelika Road. All right. Here we have when you find an early obituary with a photo, you found a gem. You found a gem because it gives me picture of Miss Rhoda. It gives me an understanding of her life, but it also brings it full circle. So Miss Rhoda Rudd, born in Lee County, Alabama, on May 8th, 1887, joined the Bethel Church. She's the widow of the late Glenn Rudd, and she was a loyal member of the Lee's Chapel AME Church. Read into the sentences. When you're a loyal member, what does that mean? You were there every Sunday. Even if it's just the first and the third, you were there. Yeah. And she was an active member of the Felista chapter number 184 of the Order of Eastern Star, and she was a member of the Sisters and Brothers of Love Society. And so here again, you have her what? Her community. But now we get something that's a little different. The other two died in Alabama. Josephine Pearson Bryant died at Tuskegee Institute, the Johnny Andrew Hospital. Britton Drake died at home. But Miss Rudd died in Kansas City, Missouri. Because what we're doing, we are continuing to tell our story. So if I need to request a death certificate after so many years, I don't have to be immediate family to do what? To request those records. And so if I want to know more about her life, I can request it. All right. But it also tells me this. She survived by 2 daughters, and she is survived by 2 sisters. And one of those is Mrs. Alice what? Connection. Do we have a connection? We're connecting our database. We're connecting our database because we're telling a larger story. All right. Here's a more recent. This came out of the newspaper. And many of us know this lady right here. Her name is Miss Odessa Frazier Hawkins. She died at 101 years old in 2008. Member of the Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church with interment in where? Baptist Hill, not Auburn. And so it tells a little bit about her life, her attending Rosenwald School on Fraser Street. She was a domestic as a housekeeper for the Holiday Jones family, Dr. Carter, Mr. and Mrs. Kirkley, and Mrs. R.B. Ford, and she was a surrogate parent. But the newspaper is a great place to find some of these obituaries that are more recent. So when I look in our Baptist Hill database, I see a lot of Frazier last names. What do I do with it? Now it's mine. If I know that, okay, I can find the obituary for Miss Odessa Frazier Hawkins. So what would be the next thing that I'm going to look for? I'm going to look for maybe her parents. Maybe I might look for siblings. because what I want to do, I want to make sure that I'm connecting the dots to do what? Tell the story. Tell the story. Tell the story. Rob, while I'm looking at it, make a note. Okay. No. Sophia Frazier. Sophia, if I'm not mistaken, that's her mama. And she didn't die. She was born in 1886. But no, I don't think she died in 1987 because she was dead way before I came along. But let's check her death date. And so, as we walk through and tell the story, they're not just dips in the ground. They're not just names in a database. This is not Baptist Hill. This is down at Green Chapel. I just used another cemetery but they're all the same. It's a sacred space that is more than an Excel file and should be a story. The question is, when the roll is called up yonder, will my name be called and my story remembered? An obituary is a story that calls the name of an individual, that tells a brief story of a family, and connects you to a community. You want to set up your own, pull out all of those obituaries that you have, and begin to sort them. Sort them alphabetically, whatever your system is. Put it in Excel. Put it in Excel. When you put it in Excel, make sure that there's a legend, that somebody understands what you're doing and how to read it. But the next thing is, after you pull all of the information that you can, whether you've been to the cemetery or you're just pulling from obituaries, is to make sure that you pull all of the information and find out where your gaps are. Are there any questions, comments, concerns? Oh, y'all are an easy crowd. What you have in front of you, you have a handout in front of you. Got some homework. Got some homework. I want you to turn to the very back, the very last page. Very last page. And you'll see a page that says the colored news. And listed in the colored news, you're going to see where Mrs. Iola Kellum is back home after spending a weekend with her family in Montgomery. You're going to see that John Jones, Essie Burston, Johnny May Gilliam, and Robert Jones, they went to Anniston last week. You're going to see where the Tuskegee Glee Club, it presented a recital. And then the next place where you see, listed among the activities of the community, Richard Carlisle, buried Sunday. Funeral service for Richard Carlisle, lifelong citizen of Auburn, will be held Sunday at the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Reverend O.D. Slaughter and J.L. Mathis officiating. With burial was at the what? Auburn. Yeah. And so this is from the Auburn Gazette. This is 1937. And so as you flip through, you'll see other obituaries from persons that are buried in Baptist Hill. Very similar, sometimes a little different, but usually structured about the same. The first is you need to know about Mr. Henry Reese and Miss Melissa Reese. You'll see their headstones. If you know anything about Toomer's drugs, you need to know the story of John Toomer and Henry Reese. The next person you'll see, we just talked about her, is who? Miss Rhoda. Miss Rhoda. The next person you'll see, her granddaughter is sitting up in here. This lady's named Maud Woodson Pearson. Yeah, her granddaughter. Wave your hand, Charlotte Pearson Wilson. She said you look like my Maud. Yeah. The next one you'll see is Miss Maud Woodson Pearson's granddaughter. We're connecting the dots. And so this is just an example of making sure that when you talk to people within your community, these are the things that you're asking for. You're asking for, you want copies of the hard copies. And to be able to put it together and to be able to keep that database growing and growing and growing. And the more, sometimes you're going to have duplicates, but that's okay. That's okay because it means that it shows you how that community was intertwined. It means that some of those folks loved and lived with the same folks, and they went to those funerals, and those people were important to them. So are there any questions? All right, if there are no